not gonna tell you any lies or feed you any dreams. I'll answer every question you have and tell you all the truth that I own. There's plenty that I just can't tell you, 'cause I don't know. But I will accept whatever you decide. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Operation Anteater, the finale. When we left off, Chantal's family had received an update on her condition. Doctors said that only time would tell whether she'd make a full recovery, and no matter what, if she survived, she was going to need serious mental health treatment. At the same time, Q had met with Spider's family. Supervisor Acevedo had helped him create a scenario by which his parents would believe he would be participating in a youth training program with the FBI so that Q could begin training him for leadership in the Five Families. They would have to keep it a secret, and Supervisor Acevedo had an ace in the hole that he believed was all the incentive they needed to keep their mouths shut. Mrs. Merrow had retired early from law enforcement because she participated in the investigation that led to the arrest of the Denton chief of police, and remaining on the force was not in her best interest, since the arrest of the chief resulted in the arrest of other officers, lieutenants, sergeants, and her captain. She'd crossed the thin blue line, and if she wanted them to keep her secret, she'd need to keep this one. That hint was enough to get Mrs. Merrow to stop asking questions, and to get both of Spider's parents to agree to play ball, pending their discussion with Spider, of course. As soon as the meeting was over and final details were solidified between Q and Supervisor Acevedo, Q got on a St. James plane headed to Miami. He wanted to be sure that his cousins understood that his interest in their lives went far beyond his or their involvement with the Five Families. He cared about them, what happened to them, and he was heartbroken to hear about the decision that Chantal had made. He also wanted to tap in with Saint, see where his head and his heart were, because he knew why Saint had pulled plenty of triggers, and that he hadn't pulled this one. Participating in the unaliving of his own brother absolutely would leave emotional scars. After briefly visiting with a still unconscious Chantal and saying his own prayers, Q pulled Saint to the side and said, "How you holding up, cuz?" Saint said, "I'm not all right, but I'll be okay." And Q understood that he and Saint weren't yet at a place where they could have that kind of heart-to-heart, so he didn't press. And then Saint said, "I appreciate you coming all this way. And before you ask, I'll be at the round table tomorrow." Q said, "You know that you can appear remotely, right? You don't have to come." Saint said, "I will be at the round table tomorrow, in person, ready to play ball." Q asked, "Is there somewhere you and I can go, sit down and talk? Or would you rather stay by your sister's side until the round table?" Saint said, "That depends. Is there something you and I need to address before the round table?" Q said, "It'll keep, but I prefer to discuss it before you make a decision." And then Saint and Q took a little ride. When they were alone together at a nearby St. James safe house, a rather extensive discussion was had. Phone calls were made, video conferences were held, and several hours passed before Saint headed back to the hospital and Q headed back to Texas. When Q got home late that night, he did everything in his power to ensure that that conversation Angela wanted to have did not happen. And by the time they went to bed, Angela was frustrated and dejected, and Q was exhausted. In Miami, Saint had assigned Star to stay at the hospital overnight with Chantal, instructed Simone to stay with Janelle and the baby, despite the fact that she had the new mother, new baby nurse, and Jerome, who wasn't leaving her side, so that eyes would be on Simone. And then he took Natalia to the cabin where they'd initially established their understanding. Natalia was surprised to see that the cabin had been prepared for their arrival. Saint said, "I'm heading to Texas in the morning. I'm going to the round table. When I'm done handling that business, I'll be back. I don't expect you to stay here until I come back. I don't expect you to even be here when I get back. But you're about to be glad that we waited to consummate our relationship." Then Natalia's heart fell into her stomach. Saint said, "When I go to the round table tomorrow, I'm going to be making a very important decision. While I'm gone, I guess you're going to have to make an important decision. I refuse to keep secrets that I don't need to keep. I'm not going to tell you any lies or feed you any dreams. I'll answer every question you have and tell you all the truth that I own. There's plenty that I just can't tell you, 'cause I don't know. But I will accept whatever you decide and respect your right to choose not to take this ride with me. I won't try to convince you or try to change your mind. Whatever you do, it needs to be your own free will." The following morning, when all parties were gathered at the round table, there was not an empty seat in the house. The saint who walked into the reconvening of the roundtable meeting was not the one who left it when it went on recess. Q quickly called the meeting to order, and the agenda went out the window, because Saint had the floor. He gave his debrief, which included his handling of the soldiers and the lieutenants who followed the orders that put Natalia in danger. He was not playing when he said they would all have to see him, because then he recapped his respective conversations with Ezra, Stax, Javier, and Manny. Then he segued right into his rescue of Regina, and Angela added in details regarding her text messages with Regina. And then Saint told the entire assembly, "My brother is dead. He took his last breaths on a yacht in the Caribbean Sea at the hands of a finisher after he'd been afforded every opportunity to course correct. I honored my word when I stood here several days ago and told you all that I would not solve your problem. Now that my brother is no longer alive and all necessary conversations have been had, there is only one party remaining who needs to face the consequences associated with the actions that put Natalia Jimenez in danger." Before he could say another word, Catherine quickly cut in, saying, "So that everyone here has a full picture, Suki Tanaka and I have an arrangement. We've agreed to conduct both legitimate business on behalf of the St. James Organization and some additional business on behalf of the Five Families, with myself as the intermediary on both fronts. She's made it very clear that I am the only person she will work with on both of those business endeavors." And he said, "As impressive as the work you've done is, and as valuable as it is to have these arrangements with the Tanaka Enterprise, I'm not sure that we can move forward with that business if it requires that you be the one managing it." Alejandro cut in, saying, "We can't afford to jeopardize such lucrative business opportunities. I believe Catherine can be reined in. She can be stripped of all other responsibilities and power." And then Saint cut in, saying, "I'm not sure how we got to deliberations or why, because the decision is certainly not any of yours. It's all mine. I've spoken to Suki Tanaka, and I've told her what I'm prepared to tell all of you. I am assuming my brother's seat at this table and officially putting in my bid to become the head of the St. James Organization." The entire room erupted in applause. Q called the meeting back to order, and Saint said, "Let's be clear. I will only accept this position on my terms, and I have some non-negotiables. I will not get married just to be crowned kingpin. I'll be choosing my own team. I will not inherit the existing one. And as the youngest person and the very first finisher to ever be in this position, my voice must be heard as it relates to recruitment, retention, and promotion, and addressing both internal and external opposition. And there are some new rules that will need to be incorporated into the tenets of the Notorious Five Families, or I'm out." Everybody looked around a little nervous, and then Manny said, "Well, all is, nephew." And then Saint sat back in his seat and said, "Buckle up. It's about to be a bumpy ride." Then Easy walked into the room, handed Saint a folder, and after opening it, Saint said, "There can never be another time where someone on the inside of one of these organizations becomes a cancer. And because we are more concerned with protecting our images, we failed to prevent that cancer from metastasizing. Sincere made it to Cancun because you all were more worried about the way the situation looked than you all were about keeping him under thumb." Nanny said, "Now, had you not demanded that he be alive and present for the birth of his son?" Saint said, "I'm not done, OG. Because you all didn't want the soldiers to know that he was dirty, because you didn't want it to look like y'all had effed up, the driver who gave him that information about Miss Johnson had no clue that Sincere was no longer in a position to have access to that kind of information. But that's not the worst of it. The soldiers are sloppy. They've gotten way too comfortable with the people you love, and they know too damn much about your personal business. They're your employees, not your friends. I get the ones that are closest to you heads have become family, but there has to be boundaries at the lower ranks. Only rotating soldiers out when they've seen too much or have gotten too close is not good enough, because by then it's too damn late." He flipped through the pages in front of him and said, "I've done a thorough review of the files related to the last few years' worth of calamities. Most of them were the result of personal beefs, and some of them could have been avoided if there were just clearer boundaries, more staffing rotations, and a better reign on your inner circles. My father's seat became vacant because y'all want to do things the same way y'all have always done them. Y'all gotta tighten up for real. Then Alejandro said, your father was the only one cheating on his wife and producing illegitimate children. Saint said, that's the last time that any of you are gonna try to use how my pops used his Johnson as a weapon to silence me. While all that is true, had his right hand not been screwing his wife and gotten in his head that the best way to get her in control of the St. James organization was to help his brother Jeff set up his boss and unalive him, he'd probably still be alive. Now, I'm sure that Catherine, with all her faults, is not the only person in leadership who's had their hand in the cookie jar. Then he looked around the room and said, I think I've let more than enough skeletons out of the closet, so I'm gonna leave that alone and focus on the issue at hand. Fraternization should not be allowed between family members or amongst the employees. And the whole room started grumbling. Saint said, should I start naming all of the times where fraternization has been at the heart of an unfortunate set of circumstances? When no one responded, Saint said, a hard rule consistently applied will make discipline easy, avoid discontent, and help keep everybody safer. Then Ezra said, working together as closely as we do, creating teams based on strong suits and the needs of the immediate family members of the members of leadership means that groups of employees spend a lot of time together and getting to know one another. Friendships are inevitably built watching one another's back. Saving each other's lives creates an inevitable affinity. Saint said, and I understand that, but there is no room for that kind of affinity in this business. Emotions get people killed. My brother is dead because he never learned how to set his own emotions aside and simply do what's right. I get that he's the exception and not the rule, but we're not running a daycare. We are employing people who have either been raised well or they haven't. And if they haven't, they have to at least have figured out how to be decent human beings on their own. Now, it could be said that you can't be a killer and a good person, but there are some caveats to that. For one, I don't believe there are any good people, and we should be demonstrating what it looks like to do what we do and still manage to be decent people. But we should not have to teach the people we employ how to be decent people. We should be hiring decent people. You either have a conscience that prevents you from intentionally doing things that you know are wrong without remorse. That's why Catherine can no longer sit at this table. But I'll get back to that. My final caveat, though, is the people we employ should come in the door with a conscience and enough backbone to ask questions. Something that they're told doesn't sound right. And none of us can afford to be so important that when they ask those questions, we can't answer them. If you can't answer it, then maybe you're not a decent person. And the decision that you've made is wrong. And I don't care who you are. And none of the heads were all that comfortable with Saint's last statement. And Saint didn't miss that. He said, and that makes you all hella uncomfortable. Y'all shoulders is up to your ears. Y'all pretending like today didn't have to pass through yesterday to get here. And when everyone looked confused, Q said, the present hasn't arrived untouched by the past. The art of war. Saint said, thank you. Killing 7 women because they slept with my father should have never been an assignment used to train Sincere when he was already one bad decision away from hell as it was. But Catherine didn't pluck that out the sky. She took that page from a book that had already been written. That's how the 5 families have done business for generations. And while you all have tried to change is a process that must be well managed, past the point of resistance, and any lingering resistance must be eliminated. Please don't misunderstand me. Everybody in this room and on the secure video conference has blood on our hands. Not one of us really regrets it. I've killed people and never even knew their names. That's what finishers do. Finishers only have one job, but they're not the people who you hire to watch over your homes while your children sleep inside. They don't stand guard while your wife attends Bible study. They don't drive your father to chemo, or secure venues for your children's track meets and dance recitals. Those people should absolutely be decent people who ask questions. They should have all the information that they need to ensure that a killer isn't running across the grass of a hospital where the baby of someone you love is being born. Those people should be so focused on doing their jobs that they cannot be bribed, tempted, tainted, or otherwise persuaded to betray your trust or put the people you love in harm's way. If we can't agree on that, then I'm not the man for this job, and I don't want to sit at this table with any of you. When everyone agreed, Saint said, anyone who doesn't come to this job with a significant other should have an avenue to find love or lovers somewhere other than within your house, the underground, in their own ranks. And that's the reason why the military has balls, and they even have parties and dances in war-torn countries, smack dab in the middle of combat, so that their rank and file has an outlet to meet service members from other platoons, battalions, ships, giving their people more options than the people that they share barracks or ships with. Even the military provides the people that they employ with sanctioned opportunities for relief and release, so that when they're hunkered down in a bunker or riding in a tank, Harry is not more worried about Sally than he is about taking out the enemy and being on the lookout for IEDs. And LJ and Q were nodding emphatically. Saint looked over at Q, and Q said, that's precisely why we don't do one male, one female teams at our firm for extended jobs. They don't travel together or work on long assignments together, and we hold ourselves to that same standard. We have a written anti-fraternization policy, because we learned when we were with the PD just how bad things could go. A man-woman team of officers lost their lives one night on patrol. They were distracted, having a lover's quarrel, and a gunman ran down and executed them both. LJ said, we both have their badge numbers tatted, so we'll never forget. Everyone got quiet, and True and Big Wood made eye contact. Saint said, and the issues go far beyond fraternization. It's also about making sure that they can keep their guards up, that they don't get too lax. Y'all had a kid hide in the trunk of her personal guard's vehicle, and her presence wasn't discovered because he trusted her instead of his training. Referring to that time when Melissa hid in her personal guard's trunk, went over to the school dance and killed a man. Saint continued saying, an elderly woman drove off in a soldier's car because the soldiers leave their key fobs in their vehicles with the doors unlocked. Referring to Mom Joyce's little trip to Oregon. Ezra had to darn near wipe the phones of 15 soldiers and a lieutenant and reassign them all because they thought it was a good idea to record a family fistfight. Referring to the other day when Anya and her crew jumped Ron and Kane, and Sincere found out where Regina was because he heard soldiers laughing about the reason she was leaving Texas. When everyone but Q was shocked, Saint said, y'all questioned the driver, but y'all didn't discuss Regina leaving town in front of Sincere. When they still looked confused, Saint said, nobody wondered why he'd even asked about Regina's file. When Manny said that that wasn't the most important thing that they had to concern themselves with, Saint said, so it wasn't important to find out how he knew that she was at that resort? Because that was not in the file. The only thing in the file was that there was an airline ticket purchased in her name to Cancun. Then he told them that he had checked the cell phone records of every soldier who was at Angela and Stephanie's estate when Regina was packing, cross-referenced their phone logs, and found a call between one of those soldiers and one of the soldiers who was assigned to Sincere's detail when he was being held in the dungeon. When Saint questioned both of those soldiers, they reluctantly admitted that they'd been gossiping. The soldier at Angela and Stephanie's estate had told the soldier assigned to the dungeon all about Regina's antics, and the soldier assigned to the dungeon decided to share that information with his comrades within earshot of Sincere. That was how he knew to ask the driver to check the file. Regina didn't book the flight or reserve the resort herself. She called her long-term travel agent. Her destination in Cancun didn't make it to the file until she checked in at the resort using her credit card. Sincere had gone straight from the airport in Cancun to that resort, and he could have only gotten that information from someone else who had access to that file. What Saint didn't say was he knew exactly how Sincere had gotten that information, and he already had a plan for how he was going to deal with that. He just couldn't risk 40 plus people who were in attendance at the roundtable meeting knowing what he knew and compromising his plans. He said, the whispering, the gossiping, it has to stop. Before this opportunity fell in my lap, I'd heard all kinds of stories about relatives of five-family leadership. Everything from soldiers beating up relatives in defense of other relatives, talking about Anya. Relatives drugging and beating up whole teams of soldiers in public, talking about Rennie at Bellamy's in Puerto Rico. And the problem isn't what was done. It's the fact that I heard about it, and it wasn't none of my damn business. Employees shouldn't even feel comfortable discussing anything that they see or hear with anyone who doesn't have a legitimate business need to know. They should already be well aware of how high the stakes are, how anything they repeat can be used by the wrong people. And they should know that failing to keep their mouths closed can and will be dealt with expeditiously. Just because you all have been successful at intercepting plots when the right information got in the wrong hands, that doesn't mean you'll always be that lucky. It's time to change for real. And I'm here to be the change maker.
For it all, I'm standing up tall until I go lay in my casket. Almighty God, thank you for giving me what I needed and not what I thought I wanted.